The ER door slid open on a gust of cold air, and Yuna Cho carried her son through them with his head lolling against her shoulder, his lips faintly blue at the edges. "His heart," she said, voice cracking on the second word. "He's 5. Please." A nurse took the boy from her arms before she finished the sentence. Machines surrounded him within a minute, a monitor beginning its thin, uneven beep, the antiseptic smell of the trauma bay thick enough to catch in the back of her throat. 2 other small shapes clung to Yuna's coat, both silent in the particular way children go silent when they understand something is wrong without understanding what. The attending physician read the chart, frowned, and said the words Yuna had been dreading for 6 months. "This valve repair isn't available outside Takahashibek Medical. He needs their cardiac unit within 72 hours. 6 months earlier, a specialist in Busan had said nearly the same sentence in a smaller, quieter room, and Yuna had spent every night since rationing which hospitals she dared research, knowing exactly which family controlled the one facility capable of the repair. She had told herself she would find another way before she ever had to make the call she'd sworn she wouldn't make. Tonight, in this ER, that promise ran out. 2 floors up, Jiho Beck stood in a private donor lounge, phone pressed to his ear, voice flat and clipped. "Confirm the shipment reroutes through Incheon by Thursday. Nothing changes." He ended the call without a goodbye, the kind of man whose calm was more unsettling than any shouted order would have been. A junior administrator knocked, mentioning an emergency intake causing a stir near the pediatric wing. Jiho barely looked up. "Not my concern," he said. Then he heard a small voice through the open door, a girl asking a nurse if her brother's heart was going to stop, and something in the tone made him glance up despite himself. He walked toward the sound and found a girl of about 5 sitting alone on a waiting room bench, swinging her legs, watching the double doors with the fixed patience of a child told to stay put. She looked up at him, unbothered. "Are you a doctor?" she asked. "No," Jiho said. "Then you can't help my brother," she said, and went back to watching the doors. A boy wandered over from a vending machine and climbed onto the bench beside her, adjusting a pair of cheap plastic sunglasses with a precise 2-finger push at the bridge. Jiho's breath caught. He'd made that exact gesture since he was 19, a habit from a mentor long dead, an old fixer named Deacon who'd worn frameless glasses his whole life and reset them the same way before every difficult decision. Jiho had never taught it to anyone and had never once considered he might pass it on to someone before he'd even known they existed. He was still standing there, unsettled by a coincidence he refused yet to name, when a woman rounded the corner from the nurse's station and stopped dead at the sight of him. 5 years dropped away from both of them in the same half-second. "Jiho," Eunice said, like the name cost her something. "How long have you had 3? He said, careful, testing. "Does it matter?" Eunice said, and looked away first, toward the doors where the 3rd child had disappeared minutes earlier. Before we get into today's story, take a second to subscribe if you enjoy emotional stories like this. Then drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what country you're in. I read every single comment, and I do my best to reply because this community means a lot to me. Your likes, comments, and subscription really help this channel reach more people and allow me to keep bringing you stories like this. Now let's begin. The boy inside was named Saiwu, and the surgical team gave him a window of 72 hours before the valve failure became unmanageable. Jiho authorized every resource the hospital had without being asked, then found Yuna outside the observation glass. "You don't get to be here," she said. "You called this hospital. I called a cardiac unit. Not you. That boy has your eyes and someone else's stubborn jaw," Jiho said. "You don't have to say it. I already know what I'm looking at." "Then stop asking me to say it out loud," Eunice said, and walked back toward the waiting room before he could answer, leaving the question suspended exactly where she wanted it to stay. Word of Yuna's arrival reached further than either of them wanted within the hour. Jiho's uncle, Diakhyun Baek, called back within minutes, warm in a way that would have reassured anyone who didn't know him well. I heard, Diakhyun said. Say the word, and I'll have my own cardiologist consult. Whatever the family needs. That's generous, Jiho said, guarded despite himself. They're my grandnephews and niece too. However this happened, Diakhyun said. Let me help. Jiho ended the call, almost believing him, a mistake he wouldn't understand the size of for several more days. Diakhyun hung up his end of that same call and turned to the man waiting in his office doorway, the one who'd first reported Yuna's arrival at the hospital an hour later than Diakhyun expected. An hour late, Diakhyun said quietly, is the difference between owning this family and burying it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The man was gone from the household payroll by morning, and nobody on staff asked where or whether gone meant only that. That evening, the hospital's transplant coordinator asked Yuna to complete a paternal consent form for the family's private cardiac unit, a formality required whenever a related donor might later be needed for post-surgical care. Yuna stared at the blank line beside father for a long moment before Jiho, standing nearby, finally said the thing neither of them had said cleanly yet. Write my name, he said. Not because the form needs it, because it's true, and you know it. Yuna's pen hovered, then moved. Since 5 years ago, she said quietly, filling in the date. I never lied to you about them existing. I just never let you ask the question directly. Jiho watched her sign it, the confirmation landing somewhere heavier than he expected, 5 years of distance collapsing into a single line of ink. Diakhyun found Yuna alone at the hospital vending machines that same afternoon. Jiho pulled away by a call and introduced himself with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. The machine's motor hummed between them, the only ordinary sound in an otherwise unsettling exchange. You've caused quite a stir coming back like this, he said. 5 years is a long time to keep 3 secrets. I don't believe we've met, Yuna said, stepping back half a pace on instinct alone. We haven't needed to, until now, Diakhyun said. I'd be careful how loudly you let this family know what you know. Loud things tend to get quietly resolved around here. He smiled again, patted the vending machine glass once as if approving of its contents, and walked away before she could answer. She stood there a moment longer, replaying his tone rather than his words, certain the two didn't match at all. She told Jiho the exact wording the moment he returned, and watched something in his expression go flatter and more dangerous than she'd seen it since the airfield. Alone in a hallway that night, waiting for Saiwa's evening vitals check, Yuna allowed herself to sit with something she'd avoided for 5 years. Not anger at Jiho, which had been easy to hold on to, but the harder truth underneath it, that some part of her had kept the children's existence secret not just to protect them, but to protect the version of herself that had survived leaving him. She didn't share that with anyone that night, but she stopped rehearsing reasons to keep her distance quite so carefully after that. Yuna's profession found its way into the crisis quickly. Walking the private wing with a nervous administrator, she noticed the pediatric monitoring rooms shared an unsecured stairwell with the loading dock, a flaw any inspector should have flagged years ago. This needs a badge lock today, she told him. Jiho didn't wait for a request to move through channels. A private detail was posted within the hour. That night, Jiho made a different kind of call. Chul-soo, eyes on anyone approaching the pediatric wing who isn't staff, and find out who's been asking about my family this week. Chul-soo had worked security for the Baek family since before Jiho took over, one of the few men who'd stayed loyal through the transition without needing to be convinced twice. He didn't ask why 3 children nobody had mentioned before this week suddenly mattered this much. He simply said, understood, and got to work. By morning, Chul-soo had an answer, a delivery van, logged under a shell vendor, circling the loading dock 4 times in 3 days, driven by a man matching no badge on file. The shell traced, within hours, to a logistics arm Jiho recognized immediately, his uncle's. Jiho went to see the address himself before he told anyone else. A half-empty warehouse near the port with Chul-Su covering the entrance. 3 unmarked vans sat inside, engines still faintly warm. Real enough to move people, Chul-Su said, running a hand along one van's rear door. Then he's not just planning, Jiho said. He's ready. He left before anyone inside noticed him, the warehouse's corrugated roof ticking in the cold the whole walk back to the car. I need to stop here. If you were in this situation, what would you do? Tell me in the comments, because the next decision changes everything. Jiho went to Boncheol, a driver in Deokhyun's household who'd owed him a debt for years and got more than he expected. They met in the back seat of a parked sedan 3 blocks from the estate, engine running for the heater alone. He's not just planning to take them, Boncheol said, voice low. I found something else in his private files last month. The car that exploded 5 years ago, the one that got you banished from your own marriage. It wasn't a rival family's work. The order came from inside your uncle's people. Jiho sat with that in silence long enough that Bong Cheol repeated himself, unsure he'd been heard. He built the excuse that separated you from her, Bong Cheol said. 5 years ago. On purpose. And the driver's family who lost someone in that car. He paid them off with a story about rival retaliation so they'd never look at him twice. Why tell me now, after keeping it this long? Because last week he asked me the same question he asked the man who's no longer on his payroll, Boncheol said. How fast I'd move if he needed something quiet done. I don't want to find out what happens if I ever say yes. Something in Jiho went very still, colder than anger, closer to the quiet that came right before he made decisions other men couldn't undo. He didn't tell Yuna everything that night. He told her enough. The bombing that got you banished wasn't a rival attack, he said. My uncle arranged it. He wanted me isolated, and you were the variable he removed to do it. Yuna's hands went still. 5 years, she said. He took 5 years from us to clear a path to a chairman's seat. I want to end this quietly, Jiho said. Contain it inside the family, the way we've always handled everything. The way you handled everything alone is exactly what put me on a plane in the first place, Yuna said, voice rising for the first time since the ER. I'm not watching you make that decision by yourself again. Neither of them resolved it that night. It sat between them, unfinished, all the way to the estate. He moved them the next morning to the family estate outside the city, its own medical bay ready for Saiwa's equipment. Deokhyun arrived at the gates within the hour, no longer warm. You're choosing an architect and her children over the board's confidence in you, he said. I'm choosing my family over a seat you engineered by putting a bomb behind my car, Jiho said. Something flickered across Deokhyun's face, gone as fast as it appeared. I don't know what stories you've been fed. I have the files, Jiho said. I have the man who found them. You have nothing left to negotiate with. Deokhyun's calm cracked for the first time, and underneath it was something colder than ambition. Then you understand this doesn't end with a board vote, he said, voice dropping lower, almost gentle in its cruelty. Families like ours don't lose gracefully. I've buried men who were far more useful to me than a woman and 3 children I've never met. Think carefully about what you're willing to lose proving a point. You already tried that once tonight, at a stairwell you don't control anymore, Jiho said. Try it again, and I stop being the nephew who lets you walk away from gates. Deokhyun turned back to his car without another word, the threat plainer than anything he'd said all week, and Jiho watched the taillights until they cleared the property line before he allowed himself to exhale. That first evening, once the children were settled and Saiwu's equipment finally hummed steady in its new room, Yuna found Jiho standing alone on the estate's back terrace, still in the same clothes from the hospital. You didn't have to do all this, she said. The estate. The security. Any of it. I didn't have to banish you either, Jiho said. I did it anyway, because I thought distance was the safest thing I could give you. I don't intend to be wrong about what I owe you a second time. Trust doesn't come back just because you say the right thing once, Yuna said. I know, Jiho said. I'm asking for the chance to earn it slowly, the way I should have the first time. Deok-hyun tried Chul-soo directly 2 nights later, cornering him outside the estate's staff quarters with an offer wrapped in menace. Your sister's restaurant lease renews next month, Deok-hyun said. I own the building. Tell me when the children sleep unguarded, and it renews quietly. Say nothing, and it doesn't. Chul-soo reported the conversation to Jiho within the hour, word for word, refusing the money before it was even fully offered. He's not just after the kids anymore, Chul-soo said. He's willing to burn anyone standing near you to get them. Jiho listened without interrupting, and when Chul-soo finished, said only, move your sister somewhere he can't reach the lease. Today, Deok-hyun called Jiho directly that same night, his voice stripped of every trace of warmth from the earlier call. Your man didn't take my offer, he said. That tells me you've already decided how this ends. I hope you've decided correctly, for their sake. He hung up before Jiho could answer, and Jiho stood in the dark study for a long moment afterward, the phone still warm in his hand, understanding exactly how little time remained before his uncle stopped asking and started acting. The children adjusted to the estate with the resilience only 5-year-olds carry through crisis. Hannah cornered Jiho in his study, climbing into the chair across from his desk uninvited. If you're the boss of bad men, she said, are you also the boss of me? No, Jiho said. Nobody's the boss of you. The estate's longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Song, met the children at the door the first night with a tray of rice cakes she'd made on instinct alone. Jiho's father used to eat these every night his own children were sick, she told Yuna quietly. I hadn't made them in years. She herded the triplets toward the kitchen before Yuna could fully thank her. That first evening, the 5 of them ate dinner together in the estate's smaller dining room, the formal one left dark and unused. Saiwa's monitor beeped softly from its portable stand beside his chair, background noise nobody treated as unusual anymore. Woojin narrated an elaborate crayon-based ranking of every superhero he knew. Hannah corrected him twice, loudly, on points of established fact. Jiho would win against all of them, Hannah announced, because he's real and they're not. That's not how the ranking works, Woojin said, aggrieved. Saiwoo, propped on 2 pillows, offered his own verdict without looking up from his plate. He doesn't even need powers. He just makes phone calls and bad things stop. The table went briefly quiet at that before Woojin returned to his crayons as though nothing unusual had been said. Later, Woojin sat beside Saiwa's monitored bed sorting crayons and asked without looking up, are you the reason Mommy changes the channel every time bad men are on the news? What makes you think that? Jiho said carefully. Grown-ups only change the subject about things that are true, Woojin said, matching 2 crayons by shade, and said nothing further. The breach came just after midnight, through the estate's old kitchen corridor, sealed but not yet reinforced. 2 of Deok-hyun's men moved through it fast, cutting power to the nursery wing's cameras, professional in a way that made clear this wasn't their first quiet entry into someone else's house. Jiho was awake before the alarm finished its first cycle, moving barefoot toward the children's room, Yuna a half-step behind with a fire extinguisher gripped in both hands. They reached the nursery as the first intruder lifted Woojin from his bed, a gloved hand already pressed over the boy's mouth to keep him from crying out. Jiho hit the man low, driving him into the doorframe until his grip loosened, and Woojin dropped free into Yuna's arms. The intruder recovered fast, and swung an elbow across Jiho's jaw hard enough to split skin. They grappled in the narrow doorway, knocking a shelf of stuffed animals to the floor until Jiho drove him back a second time, harder, and the man went still enough to disarm. Across the room, Hannah had already grabbed a heavy picture book from the shelf, planted between the wall and her brother's empty bed, refusing to move even as Yuna reached for her. "I wasn't going to just watch," she said afterward, when someone finally asked why. The second intruder went for the door instead of the children, radioing something short before Jiho's own security reached the corridor. Within 90 seconds, both men were down, disarmed, floodlights turning the back lawn into a wash of white light bright enough to hurt. "Is Saiwu still monitored, still stable?" Yuna said. They never got near him. Jiho looked at his split knuckles, then at the children finally quiet against their mother, and said nothing for a moment, the adrenaline draining out of him slower than it had come in. Deok-hyun was arrested by dawn, the intercepted men naming him within hours, unwilling to protect a man who'd sent them in with no plan for what happened if they were caught. Jiho visited the holding facility once, briefly. "You built the bomb that cost me 5 years," he said, then tried to finish the job with children. "I built a company," Deok-hyun said, unmoved even now. "You're going to run it soft, chasing swing sets and school pickups." "Maybe," Jiho said, standing to leave. "At least no one else disappears to keep it that way. Your father would call this weakness." "My father lost everyone who mattered trying to keep this family feared," Jiho said. "I'd rather be remembered as soft." He didn't look back on his way out and didn't visit again. Before the police finished processing the two men, Jiho made one final call. "Chulsu, freeze every account tied to the logistics arm before his lawyers wake up. And tell Bongcheol he's square with me." He hung up without waiting for confirmation. Yuna found him on the nursery floor near sunrise, Woo Jin asleep against his shoulder, Hannah curled beside them. "You went in before security," she said. "After everything with your uncle, you still didn't wait for backup." "I've let people I loved walk into danger without me for 5 years," Jiho said. "I'm done deciding things alone that affect all of us. Starting with this. What do you want done about the company, the board, all of it?" Yuna considered him for a long moment, surprised to actually be asked. "Together," she said. "Every decision from here." He held her to it within the day. "The board convenes Thursday," Jiho said, spreading the logistics arm's frozen accounts across the kitchen table between them. "I could let the lawyers handle the language, keep it clean and procedural. Or we tell them everything, the bombing included, and let them see exactly what he is." "Procedural lets him keep some dignity," Eunice said. "He didn't give me any 5 years ago." "Then we tell them everything," Jiho said, and for once didn't ask whether she was certain, trusting the answer because she'd been the one to give it. The morning of the surgery, the lead surgeon walked Jiho and Yuna through the procedure a final time, a whiteboard sketch of the valve repair between them. "The margin for error is small," the surgeon said, "but smaller than it was a week ago. He's stronger than his charts suggested." "Because he stopped being afraid of this place," Eunice said, thinking of how Saiwu had started asking the nurses questions instead of flinching from them. Once he understood his father was staying in the building rather than visiting it. The surgeon nodded once, gathered his notes, and left them with nothing to do but wait. Saiwu's surgery happened 2 days later. Jiho stood in the waiting room the entire 4 hours, refusing every chair offered. The surgeon came out with a mask still hanging from one ear. The repair held. "He's stable." 2 days after that, Saiwu looked at Jiho standing over the bed without a trace of the caution most adults carried around him. "You're the scary one Mommy used to whisper about," he said. "You don't look that scary." "I've been told that lately," Jiho said. Over the week that followed, the estate settled into a rhythm none of them had planned for. Wu-Jin cataloged every window in the house by which direction it faced, informing Jiho at breakfast that the east wing got better light for growing things if you ever wanted a garden. Hannah declared herself in charge of Saiwa's recovery schedule and enforced his nap times with an authority the nursing staff found more effective than their own. The board stripped Diahyun's voting rights within the week, the motion passing in minutes once the kidnapping charges were read into record. Jiho stood at the head of the table with Eunice seated beside him, a decision the older board members noted without comment. "There's a second matter," Jiho said. 5 years ago, this family was told a car bomb meant for me was rival retaliation. It wasn't. My uncle ordered it to remove an inconvenient variable from my life. I'm telling you this myself, in front of the woman he removed, so no one in this room mistakes what kind of man you were prepared to follow." The room went silent in the particular way rooms go silent when a comfortable story has just been permanently replaced by an uncomfortable true one. One older board member finally spoke. "Why tell us now, rather than let the courts handle it quietly?" "Because quiet is how he operated for 5 years, Jiho said. "This family stops using children and silence as collateral. Starting today." 6 weeks later, Hannah climbed onto the porch steps between her parents. "Are you staying for breakfast tomorrow too?" "Not just visiting. I live here now," Jiho said. "Every breakfast." Hannah studied him, serious in the way only a 5-year-old negotiating something important can be. "Okay, but you have to stop looking sad when you think nobody's watching." She paused. "It's over now. I've been told stories like these won't grow this channel. I'm here to prove them wrong. If you're still watching, subscribe, leave a comment, and come back tomorrow. The next story is already waiting."